Our entire society is predicated on this model of instant gratification. How do you teach our kids wait for the big bag later? It's
Our lifestyle is basically at war with the part of our brain that helps us delay gratification.
If it's hard and you don't like it, keep going. Anything that's hard or that's difficult is making you better at something. Hey, how you doing?
Good to go. Here we are.
Good to see you.
In
Another
the saddle.
day.
In the saddle. Dr. Bob Rotella, he likens the development of confidence to tending to sand dunes, an ongoing process requiring persistent effort to maintain effectiveness. Just as sand dunes are shaped and reshaped by the constant flow of wind and water, confidence must be continually cultivated through deliberate practice and reinforcement. So think about sand dunes, right? They kind of protect the community, but they're always like subjugated to wind, storm, and water.
They're a protective barrier.
Right.
But
they need constant rebuilding, constant attention.
They take a lot of punishment, a lot of weather, a lot of abuse, and they need to be constantly maintained, nurtured to maintain the efficacy of that protection.
I thought that was a really practical frame for self-confidence. It's not a one-time effort.
No, and you know, I've heard this said before, self-confidence is like a shower. You need one every day.
Yeah.
It just...
I will say I don't have any literature or academic references to back this, but I think the size of the waves that you take determine how much attention and cultivation you need to build that dune back up.
Of course. And self-confidence, I think, starts with a much more, not basic, but fundamental self, right? That awareness of self, that development. I love that word, of self, right? In the last episode, we talked about the first wins, one of them being mindset and community, and you were talking about self-mastery versus craft mastery, right? We're not doing a good enough job of self-mastery from an early enough age. And then you get to this point, this stage, married or not or whatever, and you realize you don't have a valuable notion of who you are, yourself, and what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are and why they're both important. And so there's no self-confidence without the self.
Yeah.
Because just regular confidence, that can come and go, right? Self-confidence is ability for you to maintain, hey, I can handle this, regardless of how bad it is. Actually, bring the bad, bring the pain. It doesn't matter how bad it is. I am going to weather the storm, either through the direct help of a higher power, which you and I talk about all the time. But that's part of self-confidence, is just kind of understanding, not I'm going to win, I have what it takes. I think it's mostly during the storms, I can weather them.
My brother, or my nephew, he's, I think, a freshman in high school, freshman or sophomore. And my brother was asking me, he wants to try out for the basketball team. He came to me partially because that was my game. Played all the way up to high school, played in college, the whole deal. So I was like the basketball guy in my family. So my brother comes to me like, hey, what should he do? Like, what are the strategies to kind of increase his chances? And somehow we got on the topic of confidence. I forget what I said or suggested, but this conversation makes me think about a question. What do you do when you're not good at something, but you know preparation will make you feel confident in that thing later? Because it made me think about myself growing up. It was like, I didn't really actually like playing basketball until I got good at it. and that may be there might be some psychological flaws in that outcome, but from 6 to
But why though? Why is it so crazy and preposterous to think that you only enjoy doing something once you got good at it? That doesn't mean that's the only reason why you should do other things.
Sure.
Right? But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, what do I know? But
I think what I'm getting at is like, it was so delicious and good
sure.
when I got good.
Sure.
But up until that point, it was a very hard process.
But isn't this what we're always talking about? The victory is the struggle.
Yeah.
You know, I was talking earlier to somebody, I think it may have been these guys, but like some of the most motivating things I see on social media with regards to fitness are that incredibly overweight person and their transformation over 7 months.
Sure.
That, to me, seeing that journey, not the end. The end is like, that's the delicious part you're talking about. But they learned the most. Their body grew the most during the struggle.
Sure.
And so I think the trick now is to reframe everything. We've been doing research for the first 40 years, right? We're not going to do the same thing now for the next 40 years.
Right.
So when something hard and difficult comes, embrace it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would say to this young person. I'm like, hey, now whether they listen or not is a completely different story, whether they understand, but I think experience wins and people respect that, even young people. It's like, hey, how hard this is going to make it really delicious later.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what I was like trying to display in words to my brother that I didn't find at the time was more of a curiosity than an answer. It's like, what is that thing that makes someone stay under the duress of this preparatory process versus someone who says, I'm out?
Sure.
And so like, that's what I'm curious about, because I mean, it's a very cliche to say, okay, do the hard work for the best possible outcome. But for someone who's like either starting out on that journey or like in the middle, like I'm curious, like what is that thing? Like what makes people like stay with it, and what makes people like just say I'm out?
I think it probably depends on a lot of things. I mean, you yourself, you have some personal experience with playing basketball at a very competitive level. And you said you kind of had some issues with your dad pushing ahead, and that helped. Which, I mean, to your credit, you just said it became delicious. It was awesome. You loved it because you were really good. You were a baller.
Yep.
But that didn't come without issues and consequences. And so I think a lot of people experience that to varying degrees. And I don't think that's as important as understanding, well, do I like it now? So who cares? I don't know if that makes sense, but what makes a person stop? Maybe the thought of that deliciousness, for lack of a better word, later just they don't care. Maybe you wanted to be good and you wanted to enjoy it. Sure. And does that mean you really hated it? Even when you weren't good? No, there's something about it that you must have liked to continue to push you through.
It was probably less about the actual game of basketball and more about like, let me see how good I can get at something.
Do you think it had anything to do with a desire for connection with your dad?
Of course.
Okay.
There was the attaboy thing, like the approval thing. For sure.
The validation, which is great stuff.
Yep.
I mean.
Yep. And this is the other side of the story, right? Devil's advocate is like, I don't know if I would have done the things I did with sport if it weren't for my dad, for better or for worse. Just normal things. Like there was no, I couldn't listen to music, couldn't go to like our senior trip to Disney
Lots of sacrifices.
Yeah. And that was a trade-off, right?
Do you regret those trade-offs?
I want to say no, but I don't know because I didn't get to do this.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. And so externally, I'll look at, my friends or what they got to do, what they didn't get to do. And like, oh, that would have been interesting. But it's not like I wish I could have done whatever I wanted. So it's a little bit of sweet and sour.
Here's what I will say in general that I've learned about hard things. Keep going.
Mm-hmm.
If it's hard and you don't like it, keep going. There's a lot of growth that's actually happening, whether you realize it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the sooner you realize it, the better, of course. But anything that's hard or that's difficult is making you better at something.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's making you more patient, whether it's kind of chiseling your grit a little bit to be able to handle uncomfortable situations.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, in general, you get more from persisting in something difficult than not.
Sure. Yeah.
Again, we're talking about in general here.
Mental models are like pictures in your mind that help you understand how things work in the world. Imagine you have a toolbox with different tools for different jobs. Mental models are the tools in your brain that help you make sense of things. And for example, if you understand how plants grow, you have a mental model of gardening. They help you solve problems, make decisions, and understand how things work by comparing them to what you already know. More tools equals more flexibility. So having that kind of like basic context, there were 5 I thought were pretty interesting that we could kind of discuss. Hyperbolic discounting is a mental model. Here it is. Hyperbolic discounting is a way of thinking about choices that people make, often showing why they might choose something small now rather than something big later. Imagine you have 2 choices, one candy bar today or a whole bag of candy next week. Even though the bag has more candy, you might pick the candy bar because you don't want to wait for something bigger. This is hyperbolic discounting. Where do you go with that?
So many places. Tooth and nail in our society today in parenting.
Mm-hmm.
How do you teach our kids wait for the big bag later?
Yeah.
And they do these experiments with kids all the time. Yeah, like you want to have 1 Oreo now or 10 Oreos tomorrow. I am curious and scared and frustrated all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I was never given the tools to wait for the big bag later.
Mm.
And I think what that shows is a general lack of patience, creativity, foresight. What can I do with a bag of candy later versus the Jolly Rancher that I'm going to have right now?
Yeah.
And I think our entire society is predicated on this model of instant gratification.
Sure.
Right? Anything I order on Amazon, I can get same day delivery right now. I don't want to drive to a store and spend any time or energy when I can just push a button and it will come. I think that's getting worse. Mm-hmm. I think we need to slow down and teach ourselves that in general, the conditioning of now is suppressing our appetite for great things later. Now, that stick of deodorant or whatever I'm going to get from Amazon in 2 or 3 hours versus that's not what I'm talking about. But
sure.
We sacrifice a lot in that big bag to get that small piece now.
Yeah.
And like, that's not what I want to teach my children.
Sure.
I really want them to have the patience to wait, the fortitude to endure the temptation, the ability to turn that off in their minds and say, if I just wait, I will get a bigger bag later. More importantly, the entire time, not fixating or worshiping or elevating the bigger bag. That's a whole other problem by itself. But can you feed others with that bigger bag? Can you put yourself in a position of relative comfort so that you could do more to give back? I don't know. But the bottom line is you will have more to share with anyone, your family, your community later. And I don't think we do a good job teaching that these days.
That's a good reframe. I like the emphasis on kind of right sizing the bigger bag. Because even if you can delay it, if your intent on the bigger bag is like
more for me,
selfish.
yeah, it doesn't. But definitely something to be said about the fact that we're more interested in the cookie now rather than the 10 cookies later.
Sure. I when I read this, there's like you mentioned, there are all kinds of spins on this same concept, but I tend to go down the path of like the psychobiology of it all. And so, 30% of our brains is the prefrontal cortex, which is like the CEO of our brain, which impacts the mind, right?
I hate CEOs.
So if you look at like the lifestyle today and just the statistics of whether it's, the weight or sleep deprivation or processed foods, like it's all like an attack on that prefrontal cortex. And so to me, it's like, it makes sense why we can't wait, because
it's
our lifestyle is basically at war with the part of our brain that helps us delay gratification,
think and process, and
right. And so for me, it's like, okay, let's get that in order. It kind of goes back to the 5 buckets, right? If you kind of like map that over to your life and you kind of get some first wins there, your prefrontal cortex is going to be healthier, make better decisions. So for me, that's what this discounting mental model points towards. This is like, you got to take care of your brain if you want better decisions. And easier said than done.
And the way you think about things and opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah.
Almost all decisions made in my 20s and 30s were short-sighted, for lack of better terms. Mm-hmm. Meaning more looking at like, what am I getting now, and less focus on the building or what can come later.
Sure.
And I've missed out on a lot of good opportunities because of that.
Next one up is the sailboat metaphor. The sailboat metaphor is a mental model used to understand the process of decision-making. It compares our mind to a sailboat, with our conscious thoughts and emotions being the wind that drives the boat towards a destination. Just like how different winds can change the direction of a sailboat, various factors influence our decisions, such as biases, emotions, and external influences. The metaphor also highlights the importance of having a clear destination or goal in mind when making a decision, and using logic and reasoning to navigate potential obstacles. By understanding this mental model, we can better control our thoughts and make more rational choices. The sailboat, our mind represents the boat. Just like how the winds can shift, factors such as biases and emotions affect our decisions, and having a clear destination or goal helps us with decision making. So the boat is our mind, and the external factors dictate the direction. Where do you go with that?
I think external factors dictate our direction more than they should. And I think a lot of our earlier years are probably like that. Whether it's as simple as we're more easily influenced by friends, good friends, bad friends, whatever. Mm-hmm. Situations, life circumstances. And I think as we get older, we get to a place where we don't want that anymore. Mm-hmm. We want our minds to be more even-keeled, right? More consistent in thought and perception. So I love that analogy, because when the storms come, and they do come, the way you react to them is going to seriously dictate how you get out of that storm. Mm-hmm. Because we're tossed by all sorts of waves.
I'm thinking about, I think this is related. Help me connect the dots. A sailboat versus a rowboat. It's like with the rowboat, right? You kind of have to like thrash and use a lot of like strength and control. With a sailboat, it's kind of like, okay, let me set my sail, kind of take survey of what's going on, and use everything I can to get to the same destination.
Or drop the sail.
Or drop the sail.
Otherwise, you're going to get tossed one way or another by the waves and the wind, right? And so the idea is it's going to do what it's going to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to weather this.
Sure.
Not let it take me one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
I think I saw something, I read something the other day that this lady, she said it so beautifully. She said, live your life by the phrase, let them. Let them.
Tell me more.
Yeah. People are going to do what they're going to do. Let them. Stop trying to control other people and other circumstances. That's the rowboat example, right? You're not really getting anywhere. With the sailboat, drop the sail and let them.
Yeah.
And I think it's really, really hard. This is something that I'm just barely starting to learn. I cannot control anybody but myself. I cannot control anyone's thoughts but my own.
Sure. Yeah.
And so much of what I'm thinking and feeling, at the end of the day, no one really cares about. It very rarely is going to affect anything there.
It's bigger in your head than it is in reality.
Correct.
You touched on it, it's related, but the next one is mere exposure effect. Mere exposure effect is a psychological idea that explains why we tend to like things we see or experience often. It's like when you hear a song for the first time and don't think much about it, but the more you hear it, the more you start to like it. This happens because our brains feel more comfortable with things that are familiar to us. So the more we're exposed to something, whether it's a person or event or a situation, we're probably ending up liking it.
I have a perfect example for this.
Okay.
And this is, it just really goes to show that we limit ourselves because we just want to be comfortable. And familiarity is comfort, right? So my kids have this habit of once they get into a song all day, every day, 5 times, and during the same car ride. And what I often say to them is, you wouldn't have even ever heard this song unless you gave it a chance the first time. So if this is all you want to hear, you're gonna miss out on an opportunity to hear another song that you're probably really gonna like and want to listen to 5,000 times. And why do they like that song? They've learned the words. It's familiar, and they wanna listen to it on overkill.
Right.
That's what starts driving us crazy as the adults. And it's like, just give some new stuff a chance.
Right.
You'll like it, or you might not. But you're never going to know either way. You're not going to find your next overkill song unless you listen to something different.
I think, that's on either like the neutral to perhaps even positive side of the spectrum. Where my mind went with this was like, where's the mere exposure effect happening in my life and perhaps collectively that is driving a unfavorable outcome or heading in a direction that's not favorable? I don't have those points, but it made me think about like, what am I exposed to regularly that is driving me towards an outcome that I don't prefer?
Familiarity is great, but it can be crippling, just to the extent that it prevents us from the opportunity to engage in a new familiarity.
Yeah.
Don't get too comfortable.
Midlife strong, baby. I really like this one. I think this is a good first principle to life. The circle of competence. The circle of competence is an idea that helps us understand what we're really good at. Imagine drawing a circle around yourself that shows the skills and knowledge you're comfortable with and know a lot about. Inside the circles are things you know well, subjects you enjoy, school activities or professional activities that you practice often. Outside the circles are areas where you might not know as much. It's important because staying inside the circle means you are working with things you're good at and operating out of your strength zone. On the other side, it allows clarity for you to like draw lines with people or situations where you're pretending to be an expert when you're not.
Mm.
There's a lot here,
Sure.
but where do you go with it?
Yeah, that one's interesting. Why do we pretend to know stuff we don't?
I don't know.
How long did it take you? I mean, maybe you're always like this. I don't know. To be able to be like, I don't know. I don't know anything about this.
I still do it sometimes where like I'll catch myself
Pretending to know.
engaging or saying something. I'm like, I shouldn't speak on this. I shouldn't do this because I haven't experienced it. And maybe it's like the fear of like looking not smart or getting the approval of most of the time people I don't really care that much about.
Just
Yeah.
general rejection
Right.
of ideas or
Mm-hmm.
intellect or whatever.
I think somewhere along the lines I adopted this thought line of if I'm not good at something or if I don't like know the answer or know how to do it, then it's like a legitimate threat to like me. It sounds crazy to say out loud, but
not.
I think there's something there. Probably back to sport, like you mentioned with my dad's, like if I messed up or didn't play a good game.
I think it's just a general fear of rejection.
Yeah.
Because as men generally we're taught to be guarded
Mm-hmm.
and to know everything. Don't ever look like you don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think very rarely you're going to find in a group of 9-year-old boys having an interaction about a sport or something, one being like, I really don't understand this, so I really don't know. Hey, this isn't my strong suit. And so we're taught to just pretend.
Yeah.
I think where it gets even crazier and deeper is the emotional stuff.
Yeah.
Because we don't know anything about emotions.
Or we pretend.
We
Just like mask.
right.
Yeah.
There's several things we do, but none of it is like, hey, I'm feeling a certain kind of way, and I don't know what this means. I'm really interested in finding out, and I'm probably not the best person to look to.
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of guys can save a lot of relationships early,
Sure.
real early, by just taking stock of that discomfort, that uncomfortable, foreign, uncontrolled rage and anger.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot there.
For sure.
And I didn't understand it until I was forced to. But then I got pretty okay at saying, I don't know why I feel this way.
Mm-hmm.
But I do. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one makes me think of, I don't want to like diminish its like value, but I went to like the ratio of like how much time are you spending like in your strength zone and how much time do you like spend in like you're outside of your circle of competence to grow? Because there's a whole thing, right? Like you need to get out of your comfort zone to grow.
Yeah.
It's like, what is that? It probably looks different for everyone, but
And that's tough for many reasons.
right.
Just average blue collar worker,
Yeah.
of which America is 60, 70, 80%. I don't know. They have a 9 to 5
Right.
and then they got to go home, pick up the kid. Like there's not that much time.
Sure.
And as we've spoken about many times, so much time is wasted.
Yeah.
Just so much time is wasted. And so it's not always a priority,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those first wins of mindset, movement, nutrition, community, recovery. It's not really on many people's radars just because we don't have time.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
As long as once you recognize it, try to start making time.
Sure.
Because those 5 things are so important and those 5 things are so critical to a thriving person. And And we don't focus on it enough.
Last one. Occam's razor is a simple idea that helps us solve problems or make decisions. It says that when you have different ways to explain something, the best choice is usually the simplest one. In other words, if two explanations seem equally good, the one that has the fewest assumptions is often the wisest one.
Yeah.
The last line I'm still working with. The decision that has the fewest assumptions is often the wisest one.
I like that, and I'll tell you why. Assumptions get us into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, think of the communication breakdown in marriages, which you and I have very specifically experienced.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of assuming.
Yep.
On both sides. But assumptions in general get us into a lot of trouble.
Why do we do it?
Well, I don't know. Probably just because it's a default.
It's safer
For us, in the moment,
or easier or both?
maybe both. It's easier to assume someone's trying to hurt you.
Yeah.
I mean, you're the psychologist. I don't know what the lizard brain, is that what it is? The lizard part of our brain just assumes someone's trying out to
It's
get us.
protective.
What about they're just looking out for themselves? What about incompetence?
Yeah.
What about negligence? That's probably even a little bit easier, but I don't know. But assumptions get us in trouble. Assumptions of someone's intention
Yeah.
always gets us in trouble. And so I would say the fewer assumptions that can be made is probably just the best.
Sure.
Now, that's easy to say and hard to put in practice.
Yep.
Because all day, every day, we're assuming things.
Yeah.
Right? Like, classic example, someone cuts you off in traffic.
Mm-hmm.
You're just assuming that person is rude.
Sure.
That's the first assumption.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to assuming, they're having an emergency or they're having a really bad day.
Yeah.
They could literally be on the phone getting not even necessarily really bad news, but just really frustrating news.
Does this principle or mental model, does it map over to business decisions?
Yeah, it does. It does. I think it's much more concrete. Meaning, I've said this to you before. I don't think anyone's in business trying to necessarily hurt me.
Sure.
Or screw me over. They're just looking out for their best interest.
Mm-hmm.
Generally. But assumptions in business are terrible.
Yeah.
Because then you're executing on not facts.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
That's when you say it like that, I mean, damn. Across different domains, business, life, parenting. What I'm getting at is like, because you can't like filter all your assumptions and whittle them down to concrete facts all at one time. You're going to have to kind of let some assumptions slide through. Maybe that's the wrong thinking, but it just feels like, how do you apply this and map this over to a life in the major areas? Do you like do it one sector at a time? Can you do it all at one time? Does that make sense?
You can probably do it all at one time to the extent that you can just recognize a lot of the things you say and actions you take could be predicated on an assumption. You could. I mean, look, this is really cliche. Benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Benefit of the doubt. Benefit of the doubt almost always shows more love, more empathy, more patience, more support.
I think now that you're breaking it down in the definition, I think the key word is fewest or least assumptions is the wisest one. I was going black and white, thinking where it's like there's no assumptions at all.
I think it's really tough to do that for anyone.
Yeah.
I mean, you're always working under some assumptions. Right?
Sure.
For example, in business, I assume that all my employees are doing the best job they can.
Yep.
You're always working on, and some assumptions are good.
Yep.
You know, I think you really hit the nail on the head. Black and white thinking is dangerous, deadly, restricting. It is life-taking, not life-giving.
Yeah.
You know, there just happens to be a lot of gray.
Yeah.
And that's okay. You just got to navigate that gray.
I feel like that's what the Midlife Strong way is about. Navigating the gray as best you can.
I think that's a great place to end.